Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on why projects fail, hosted by Invensys Learning. Did you know 31% of projects will be canceled before completion, and 52% of projects cost 189% of their original estimates, and 25% of technology projects fail outright, and 50% need massive reworking by the time they've finished? My name is Kaylin Saunders, and I will be your host for today's session. A brief introduction about us. Invensys Learning is a leading training and certification organization providing globally recognized certification courses such as PMP, Prince2, CAPM, Lean Six Sigma, PMI-ACP, DevOps, COVID-5, cloud computing, big data, and more. Over 10,000 professionals worldwide have been trained and certified by Invensys Learning for some of the leading Fortune 1000 companies and government organizations across 40+ countries since 2015. Invensys Learning also hosts webinars on some very interesting topics across various industry verticals. So follow us on LinkedIn and other social media platforms to stay regularly updated on our upcoming webinars. Today's webinar will be presented by Ori Shibi, a project management expert with over 25 years of experience in transforming both large and mid-sized organizations. Many enterprises have benefited from Ori's approach in providing practical new ways of leading sustainable change, managing and dealing with projects, and introducing new change initiatives. He has authored a book, Managing Stakeholder Expectations for Project Success, and co-authored a book, Project Management Business Analyst Role Collaboration. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A panel, which is on the right side of the screen, and I will bring them up at the end of the presentation. Also, there will be poll questions during the session, so kindly participate to make the session much more interactive. Now, without further ado, I will go ahead and hand it over to Ori to take this webinar session forward.
Thank you, Kaylin. Welcome, everyone. Good day, everyone. So I'm going to talk here today about why projects fail, but not because of the regular reasons that most people look at, oh, we're over budget, we are behind schedule. But I'm trying to go a little bit deeper here as to underlying reasons, more like organizational reasons. And that's why this whole idea is inspired by Make It So Number One. If you're a Star Trek fan, right? Make It So Number One. So many times I've been in situations where it felt like my manager was telling me that, right? So essentially they looked at me and they said, or they didn't say, but they looked at me in a situation where we didn't have enough money, we didn't have resources lined up, we didn't have approvals, there was not enough time, and somehow they pointed at me and they said, hey, make it so, number one, right? And somehow, against all odds, they expected me to do something. I have a colleague who calls it the magical margin, right? I'm going to talk about it later, that they think I have something up there, I have something up my sleeve. I think they have something up their sleeve. Nobody has a sleeve altogether, right? And we find ourselves upon reaching a point in the project where we have to deliver results, and we just can't. So really, we're going to try dynamic and exciting are very, very ambitious words for anything related to project management, but we're going to try to explore ways to improve project management by taking a look at what it is that really takes us down, because, I mean, Kellen read those numbers. They're pretty amazing numbers that so many projects fail, so many projects go so much over budget, so many objectives are just not being met. And it's not because we don't have good people, and it's not because these are not good objectives. There's some sort of a disconnect somehow that we must be able to bridge, because if we don't, we're going to continue to fail at these astonishing rates. And these disconnects are not necessarily about rocket science, right? It's not necessarily about anything that is not within reach. These are basic things that if we just follow them, most of them are in the methodologies, right? Whether it's Prince2 or PMI or whatever. So we're going to take a look at how to get better with those things. So as far as the structure for the next hour or so, after getting some context here, we're going to break it down to a few pieces. How did we get here? So why are we sitting in a session that asks why projects fail? Like, what are the things that brought us to these situations. I mean, after all, we are now entering into the 6th edition of the PMBOK, right? I mean, we are 21, 22 years almost from when the PMBOK first came out, and there are over 700,000 PMPs. There are more than that Prince2s around the world, and yet for some reason we're not necessarily delivering better results than we did 20 years ago. So with all these certificates, with all that education, with all that knowledge out there, something is still amiss. Then we're going to take a look at the challenges we face, some solutions and fixes, and a few things just to articulate. First of all, how to measure urgency, right? We know how to prioritize things. I mean, there are all sorts of mechanisms, but very few people have the ability to really articulate what constitutes as urgent, right? I mean, people come to me, to my desk in the office and tell me, oh, it's urgent. And first of all, I'm very impressed because it must be very important. And then when they tell me it's urgent, I mean, it looks urgent to them, but when you look at it from a bigger picture, it's not really urgent, right? So I'm trying to coach and educate my team and my stakeholders to really have a consistent approach to measuring what is urgent, so we don't overuse these terms and we don't overuse these adjectives, urgent, important, extremely important, and stuff like that. Then I'm going to show you my manifesto, right? A set of beliefs that I have about project management that I learned the hard way, of course, but it really helps me focus on really what matters as opposed to on what people ask me to focus on. I'm going to talk about cross-project collaboration because a leading cause of failures in projects is the fact that other projects are taking away resources from us. Other projects are blocking us. Other projects are getting the right of way. Other projects are mooching from us, right? And somehow we got to be able in a situation that we understand the impact of cross-project action and, of course, of cross-project collaboration. The last thing is the advisory, which is another idea that I find and many organizations I work with find is useful, right, and helping them in real time. So, first of all, why are we here? Because it looks like it's a game, right? It's not a game, but it feels like it's a game because people expect the project manager to do things above and beyond the laws of physics, right? With no time, with no money, right? I mean, people just come to me and say, make it so, number one, right? I was actually, fairly recently, I was in an agile project, and when they asked us when they're going to be able to get certain functionality, and we pointed at about 4 months down the road, one of the stakeholders looked at me and said, why is it taking you so long? Aren't you agile? And I thought there was some sort of a camera there. I thought I was going to be on TV because really, I mean, the fact that we are agile doesn't mean that we can actually pull magic, right? I mean, there still has to be a process. There still has to be a design, the build, and a test, and whatever. So there's no magic, right? Your manager asks you something, you tell them what it's going to take. Your manager said that there's not enough whatever to do it, money, time, resources. And yet the expectation is that you still have to deliver. I mean, change requests are being submitted. You tell them what it's going to take. And then they say, okay, you don't get that money and time, but you still have to deliver. So there's definitely a consensus that something's got to change because we keep, the definition of insanity that is trying to do the same thing again and again and yet expect different results. I mean, every time, and when a project is not delivering to its full potential, people just roll their eyes and look surprised, act surprised, but many of us don't really get surprised, right? I mean, I can tell you how many times I and colleagues of mine, we knew that the project that we were working on was doomed or projects were doomed from day one. You didn't have to be a big expert. You just add up the things, add up the objectives, and you say that physically it's not going to be possible. So I'm going to try to take a look at what are the underlying reasons are. And then again, it's much more simple than you think. So make it so, number one. Here's a poll, right? Here's a question that I have for you. In your environments, out of these 4 options, why projects fail, right? Is it related to organizational issues? Is it because of insufficient focus on planning? Is it because of sign-offs and decision-making? Is it because of too many stakeholders involved and too many changes? Do we have do we have the
Yes,
poll
the poll is already open, so please go ahead and look at the right-hand side of your screen to answer the poll. Looks like we've already got some responses in. You'll have about 10 more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and close it. And go ahead and close the poll.
Excellent. So thank you, Kellen. So we see that, the largest chunk here, you think that, not think, but you believe that it's insufficient planning. And then right after that is too many stakeholders involved. I think that this breakdown, based on my experience, is very common to these kinds of questions, right? So you see mainly it's a matter of planning. Mainly it's a matter of people changing their mind, which, by the way, can be tied back to planning. Sign off and decision making, even though it's not the majority here, it's still 20%. It's so ironic that so many projects go well until it gets to the decision making point, and then all of a sudden there's nowhere to be found. I mean, I had a sponsor years ago that told me, Ori, my door is always open. It gave me such a good feeling. The door is always open. I'm always going to be able to approach this person. And the thing was that before long, I realized that the door was always open because this person was never there, right? So I could never get a sign off. I could never get an approval. I could never get a nod, whether it's a writing or not. And ironically, every time the project was doing okay, and then it reached a decision point, and single-handedly the decision points, the sign-offs, were delaying the project. And then 10%, and I'm not sure that it's really only 10%, that it's really representative, but organizational readiness issues, maybe at the end of the session we'll have to rethink this question, because so many times it's really an issue that is coming from the organization rather than actually from the project itself. So first of all, no project management presentation or webinar or course can go today without having the word agile mentioned there. So here I mentioned the word agile. Why? Because so many organizations are now going more and more agile. I actually, I read some sort of an article or some sort of a newsletter the other day. I don't even remember which organization it was, but it read that by the end of the year, our organization is going to be fully agile. And one of the problems that I have with that is I'm not sure that any organization should have all their projects going agile, right? Agile is not a mandatory thing, and agile is not something that we want to do just because everybody's doing that, right? There is something very important associated with agile. It's an approach, and it's suitable only for certain types of projects. And for other projects, waterfall will be the way, right? What qualifies for agile? If the project goes through changes, if there's an early release or early need for release of benefits throughout the project, and if there's greater focus on quality, this is when agile needs to take place. But if there are not many changes, I don't need to have all this mechanism for agile. Also, if there is no need for early realization of value, I don't need to bug my customer every few weeks with a release when they don't want it. So it's not a matter of blaming agile, even though many organizations prematurely try to do agile and they fail, and then they say, well, agile sucks, right? That's not the case, right? If you force it, it's not going to be good for you, right? We need to check, first of all, if the project is really calling for this type of approach, right? Because it could be that the project is going to be sufficiently done in the waterfall environment. Right? After that, we have to take a look how ready we are for an agile project. I recently finished a large project with a government agency in Canada. I am based in Toronto, Canada. And the project was to really help them pick the right approach and check how ready they were. And even though they were not very ready, it was a great step in the right direction, because the readiness assessment allowed them to see what areas they need to adjust, what areas they need to improve, whether it's environments, whether it's automated testing, whether it's different types of resources. And it got them much closer to being able to deliver successful agile projects. Right? Another element to consider is the governance, right? There has to be a significant, I apologize for all these noises here, there has to be a significant organizational change component to any type of agile project. Why? Because existing, or rather waterfall-driven governance structures will not go, right? And the last thing that is mentioned here is business analysis. I'm noticing that many business analysts are asking me all sorts of existential questions because many people question the need for the existence of the BA, right? I mean, in the early days of Agile, it used to be like that. If people said, well, we have only 3 roles and we definitely don't need a BA. And then people started realizing that maybe the skill of the BA is required. However, we don't necessarily need a person called a BA. And more recently, we're starting to get more and more demand for Agile business analysis. I mean, I'm now co-authoring a book called Agile Business Analysis, or at least that's the subject of the book, right? So the business analyst will really be there to help the product owner, in turn to help the Scrum Master or the coach or the PM, and of course to be there for the team. So Agile-related issues are not because Agile is a problem, it's because any good thing has to be applied in context. I cannot take Agile and just apply it into a project environment arbitrarily just because everybody is doing it, just because it's cool, right? Because it's not going to give me the results that I need. So, Kellen, we have another poll here. Do you face any challenges in your projects? And if yes, what are the causes of these challenges? So it's a little bit of a different type of question than before. Is it about choosing the right approach? Is it about organizational readiness issues? Those of you who work in Agile environments especially, is it governance and decision making, or is it team and process issues?
Excellent. And the poll is already open. We already see some responses coming in, giving you another 5 or 10 seconds. Since you are unable to see the poll results, we'll go ahead and read them to you.
Actually, I can see them. Thanks.
I think the participants are unable to see the poll results, so but I'm glad you can see them, Ori. That's very helpful. And you read them out on the first time. So go ahead and close the poll, Zach. And it looks like we have the highest ranking one is the team and process issues at 45%, and then the next one with 27%, a tie between the organization Agile readiness issues and the governance and decision-making hold back the Agile projects.
Excellent, thank you very much. So again, these are interesting results, right? Quite common again, team and process issues. It means that we may not have the right people. We are noticing that there is some sort of a dilution effect with Agile projects, simply because more and more teams are engaging in Agile projects, and sometimes we are starting to bring in people who are not necessarily the most suitable for Agile environments. Again, it's not a matter of good or bad, but in early days of Agile, I mean, team members were handpicked, and now all of a sudden, more and more people are engaging in Agile. Many of them are just not going to perform very well in this kind of environment. Again, a tie between governance and organizational readiness. Again, governance is that you have now processes, PMOs, reporting that are just not aligned with the Agile needs, and they create redundancies. And of course, organizational readiness is, hey, let's do Agile, even though we may not have practices or resources or capacity to actually do that. Choosing the right approach, I mean, this is something that is just not at the forefront of people's minds. And many times we have situations that people are just saying, okay, Agile is the right thing, but again, it's a whole lot of mechanism in order to release benefits early and realize them, in order to deal with change. And sometimes we have projects, especially compliance projects for certain environments, that do not go through a lot of change and do not need early releases. And it's just going to be a waste of our time and a waste of our resources to actually try to manage them in an Agile approach. So a little bit more context, and I call it the sad reality of project management, and it's really something that is quite challenging. So we need to recognize a few things. First of all, I call it culture of alligators. Why? Because if you watch Discovery Channel or National Geographic, and sometimes they have shows about alligators, you always see alligators coming out and grabbing and taking and grabbing and fighting with each other. But I never see an alligator looking at that alligator friend and saying, hey, you can have some. Here, I'll help you, right? And unfortunately, in many project environments, it sometimes feels like that, right? Like alligators. I don't see project managers collaborating. I don't see project managers talking to each other. I don't hear people, whether within the team or not, saying, hey, how can I help you, right? I'm not saying it's in all environments, but it's still way too common. So we really got to get rid of that. Right. Also, the adjectives. We did a website. We updated a website. It was a long time ago, and one of the stakeholders, one of the requirements read that the website had to be awesome. Awesome. Awesome was the word or the requirement. And we sat down and we tried to discuss what awesome was, and we brought in the stakeholder who actually was behind that requirement, and we asked, "What do you think? What are you trying to tell us? What's awesome?" And I apologize for the language, but the person used the following term. They said, "Oh, it has to be kick-ass." Right? And I said, "What? How do you actually manage? How do you actually build a test case for an awesome website?" Right? How do you build a specification? How do you identify acceptance criteria? Whatever is awesome for you may not be awesome for me. So we must be able to get rid of adjectives. And this includes when people send me an email, "Hey, can I get it ASAP?" Like, by the way, I find it that ASAP is one way of asking. As soon as possible is another way of asking, right? So if they say as soon as possible, I take it seriously. If they say ASAP, I just think that they're very polite, right? But all jokes aside, we got to be very specific. If you need something, tell me when you need it. Tell me 5 p.m. Eastern time, whatever, and I'll tell you if I can do it or not. Just don't tell me vague things, because this is just opening the door for problems later. Team building is also another problem, and team building does not necessarily have to be going kayaking on the nearest river, right? There are all sorts of ways to perform team building, including project activities, right? Risk management, brainstorming, assumption discovery session, of course, agile planning sessions, working together, right? So team building is just doing important things, but maybe doing them in a little bit of more of a fun way, so we can actually become more cohesive. Also dealing with conflict properly, because many environments, many people are just trying to avoid conflict, avoid dealing with it, and this does not take us anywhere right or anywhere good, right? Dealing with it. So every time we face an issue, every time we face a hurdle, I want to make sure that my team is better off right now than it was prior to the problem that we faced. Also, we live in an era of instant gratification, right? I mean, short-term wins, people just do whatever looks good, whatever makes them look good, and whatever will show benefits on the long term, on the short term, instead of actually on the long term. One of these things is lack of appreciation for planning. Again, don't forget, when we go agile, it does not mean that we don't plan. It does not mean that we don't document. We just do it in a different way. Probably we do even more planning in agile than in a regular waterfall project. It's done in those little spikes along the way, right? And our focus is on planning whatever we need just in time, as opposed to build a big plan and then be busy changing it. Understanding what efficiency is. Like, what is an efficiency? Efficiency is not what many organizations think, because many organizations are saying, hey, let's be efficient. That means let's get rid of some people, and then we're going to be able to work better. So this is not efficiency. This is called layoffs, right? Efficiency is something else, and it's really trying to get more out of the people that we have. And it ties back to a lot of things that are again, adopted by or represented by Agile. It's coming to a lot of things that are under the umbrella of portfolio management. This is capacity management. We have to understand our capacity. This is prioritization. We need to know what comes in first and second. This is time management, something that we don't like to admit, but we are not very good at time management, right? So it's really trying to do more with what I have, as opposed to more with less, right? I want to do less with less overall, right? Just be more efficient. And then tools and methodologies, right? So you saw that I have a full line of education after my name. It's mainly for teaching purposes, but it's not really about the methodologies. So I had done Agile, I had managed and led Agile projects long before I became a Scrum Master, and I led projects long before I became a PMP, and I was a business analyst long before I had a certificate, right? The certificates were more to reinforce, especially when I conduct training sometimes, right? Rather than actually anything else. And it happens way too often. I did a large Agile adaptation with a large bank in the US, and along the way, so many times people told me, what you're proposing, they said, is not fully Agile. And I wasn't sure what they meant. And then they said, Scrum calls for something else, because, Scrum is very black and white. And my answer was that one day we will all have a judgment day, and when we stand there, nobody is going to check how agile we were, right? They may check how successful we were, but not how agile. So sometimes you have certain environments and just Scrum cannot work the way it's proposed, right? The availability of the product owner may not be there. The needs of the customer may be different, right? I mean, they told me our sponsor can only come in every 3 months to actually give feedback. So if they come in every 3 months, the iterations are going to be way too long. So somebody said, well, but this is not agile. So we really have to find a nice path, like in everything else, a middle of the way, something that actually works in our environment, as opposed to, oh, let's just be agile without actually thinking about it. So I'm moving to the right, to the alligator side, and think, okay, what kind of fixes? So first of all, the people, right? Several times, I think 4 or 5 times in my career, it happened to me that somebody in the heat of a project told me, this organization would be great if not for the people. And I paused and I looked and I really, again, didn't know what to say or what to do. What do you mean if the organization is the people, right? We must understand that we have stakeholders, we have team members, and we got to make sure that we understand them. We got to make sure that what we do represents value in their eyes. Because if we don't, we're going to very soon lose touch, lose track, and with that, we're going to end up failing. We have to define and articulate success. What really constitutes as success? Like even in our personal lives, right? It's not that we sit down and we have a list, but before you go out in the evening with a bunch of friends to a restaurant, you pretty much have an idea of what you want to get out of the evening, which is a combination of good food, good company, good value, good service, or whatever. But it's pretty amazing that it's the same group of friends that at the end of the evening may get up and some people will say, wow, that was a great evening. And another person may say, oh, I really didn't like it, right? So we have in the project many people, many stakeholders with multiple views. Some of them actually don't even know what their own views are. And we got to be able to articulate what constitutes as success, right? I'm blessed to live in Toronto. We have great sports in this city. We just never win anything, right? So we have Toronto Maple Leafs, which is one of the wealthiest hockey organizations in the world. However, we haven't won a championship in 50 plus 1 years, a Stanley Cup. Right, so you want to look and say, okay, I mean, what is the success criteria of the Maple Leafs? And when you look at it from a fan perspective, it's, well, win a game, get to the playoff. But when you look really from the organizational perspective, from ownership perspective, the success is about how wealthy you are, how well the organization is doing. If you sell out games every game, every time, if you have TV channels and other sports teams and merchandise and restaurants and condominiums and whatever you have, and the owners are really doing financially exceptionally well, which is a major measure of success. It just introduces a big gap between their success and the success of the fans. Right? Prioritization, we mentioned that. Prioritization involves importance and urgency that I'll talk about later. Lessons learned in Jiu-Jitsu. Right? Jiu-Jitsu is a form of martial arts. Why is it here? Because martial arts, the main principles behind it are when we need to do something, instead of actually entering confrontation, we are better off continuing an existing motion and going around it. One of the ways is my colleague Kevin Aguano, he wrote a book about a stealth approach to agile, stealth approach. What does it mean? Instead of actually calling it agile and immediately have a whole bunch of stakeholders resisting it, let's just apply some of the concepts that Agile introduces without calling it by too many names. And then, by the way, at some point, people are going to say, oh, wow, things are going great here. We don't have to call it by names. Same thing with conflict management. Same thing with handling people in general. I want to reduce the confrontation, but not because I want to avoid conflict, but because I really want to I want to be more conducive to actually being productive and working together. Another concept, cost of quality. Most people, even though they probably know what it means, they really don't talk about it enough. What is cost of quality? Cost of quality is how much quality is costing us. And even though there's no one consistent number, we all know that a dollar that is misspent early on will cost us more when we check the process or when we test it, and will cost us more when it fails, especially if it fails externally. I mean, just let's take something from the public domain. I mean, the Note 7 from Samsung, right? There was a problem with the design that did not allow the battery to inflate a little bit, right, with the heat. And as a result, some devices, more than they had anticipated, caught on fire. Imagine, take a look, first of all, at the damage that Samsung suffered as a result of this thing. We're talking about the billions of dollars, probably $6-7 billion. We talk about eliminating a line of the most successful phone. And of course, the reputation. I'm a Samsung phone owner, but still, you always think. At the same time, how much it would have cost them if they had managed to intercept this problem pre-launch. Even if it would have cost them in the millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars to delay the launch, it would have been much cheaper than the impact. Now, it's not a matter of somebody's fault, whose fault it is. It doesn't matter. It's not a matter of blaming. It's a matter of just always keeping an eye to quality, because whatever we can do today and we fail to, excuse me, it's not that I'm getting emotional here, just to have something. So that as long as we discover stuff early, it's going to be cheaper than if we have to discover it later. The manifesto we'll talk about later. Collaboration, this is what it's all about. And then Kaizen, which is continuous improvement. It means that, again, I'm going back to Agile. Let's take a look at lessons learned on an ongoing basis. Every time we pause for a second at the end of an iteration, let's learn something, let's apply something, and let's move on as a better team. So with that, let's move on and take a look at the challenges, right? We have methodologies and processes we talked about, but we don't spend enough time on things that really matter. Understanding the vision. There is a disconnect between the great idea that is formed higher up in the organization and the tactical way of achieving it, which is about the project. Connect the success rate to the business objective and then do proper planning. Also, less visible things early on throughout the project, right, can help us. And what are these visible things? We will wait a few minutes and see what they are. So, why projects fail? Unrealistic expectations and demands. We touched on that. Fact-free planning. It means that we plan based on best case scenario, based on a fantasy plan, right? Many of us are tempted, or rather guilty, of taking a deadline and planning backwards from that deadline. So my manager comes to me and says, hey, I need it in 4 weeks. I said, okay, how am I going to be able to fit everything into 4 weeks? Right? The right way to do it is to put the deadline aside, to try to build really a bottom-up plan to think how long it's going to take me, and then try to compare them and explain to my manager, have a conversation, right? Work harder, work smarter, work faster. So our project was late. What do you mean late? We had not hit the deadline yet, but it was tracking toward being late. So we alerted our sponsor, and the sponsor came and said, okay, guys, you got to work harder, you got to work smarter, you got to work faster. First of all, implying that we were not. And second, we didn't exactly know what it meant because we were working at capacity and then some. Another common problem is that people take away contingencies. So we did risk analysis and we realized we needed about 18% contingency. Time, money, didn't matter, 18% extra, almost 20%. So my manager said, it's not going to happen. We cannot give you 18%. We can cut it in half, take 10. So this is not a game, right? We're not compromising here on 10. We needed 18% for a reason, right? 10% was not enough, right? So if they take away my contingency, don't forget the contingency is not for me. The contingency is for reality, right? If they argue with me about contingency, what else am I going to do? Missing in action sponsor, right? Sponsors tend to disappear. They're important people, they're busy people, they're very qualified people. They oversee multiple projects, and I'm only one of them. And even though I may need the sponsor for several hours per week, the sponsor can give me 20 minutes every 2 weeks, and usually it just doesn't add up. Business analysis issues, well, I have a whole book about it, right? The relationship between the PM and the BA, we really should act as one entity, and unfortunately, there's a lot of friction, a lot of gaps in the expectations. And then again, even between the CBAP and the PMBOK, we have a gap in terminology sometimes, so sometimes we just may not have a conversation where we understand each other. Not making decisions, project chicken. right? Many stakeholders think that if you ignore a problem, it's going to go away. Many stakeholders think that if they make no decision, it's just going to buy us more time, not realizing that it's the opposite. When you fail to make a decision, it's equivalent to making a decision to do nothing, and there are consequences for doing nothing. Fear of assumptions. I'm not going to even ask how many of you like assumptions, because I know you all hate assumptions, but I like assumptions. And it says that there's C-rates, right? Constraints, risks, assumptions, issues, dependencies. These are all these pesky things that nobody likes talking about, but these are the underlying factors for project success. Because if me as a project manager focuses on these things, there is more likelihood that I will be able to actually deliver value. Fear of saying no is another thing, and it's related to a fact-free planning. My manager asked me, can you do it? And what am I going to say? No. I mean, if I say no, they'll get rid of me and ask somebody else, right? So we need to make sure that we really tell them the truth and, of course, explain why. And through all these things, if I have proper business analysis, I understand contingencies, right? I present decision points, I take a look at the risk, assumptions, constraints, I will have the ability to say no and explain why not. And then again, having the not doing agile the right way. Here are more things, right? No one likes talking about risk. We said risks and assumptions and constraints. Lack of real-time support for day-to-day staff. So what do I mean real-time support? Sometimes escalation procedures or even simple questions that resources have that can help them figure out things, just there's no one to ask, right? There's no proper resource available. There's no really line of communication that can help us with that. Talked about skirting around prioritization. So I have 10 things to do. My manager tells me they're all equally important and they're all top priority. There's no such thing. I mean, there must be a ranking. There must be the ability to say which one is more important than the other. And then there's the miracle margin. My boss asked me for something unrealistic. I'm afraid to say no. My boss thinks, okay, well, maybe Ori has something up his sleeve. I'm thinking, well, I know my boss, this person is very realistic. So if they ask me to do it, they probably have something up their sleeve, some sort of a superpower, right? And the result is that no one has anything up their sleeve. So the magical margin is a major issue. And if they don't communicate to me the special forces that they have, I will assume that they don't have. So if they ask me something unrealistic, going back to the ability to say no and all that due diligence around it. Bosses think the same about us. That's related to the miracle margin. We all count on best case scenarios. So I came to a project and we always had problems deploying the product from the development service to the testing service, and it always took like 3 days, even though it was supposed to take a couple of hours. And then I said, okay, now that I'm here, everybody's going to do what they have to do. Everybody's going to mark the files properly. Everybody's going to mark the EAR file. Everybody's going to deploy it. Everybody's going to be there to answer questions. And again, I mean, reality crashes and burns, right? I mean, the fact that I was there for the first time in that project did not mean that people put on their best behavior hat. And then, of course, the deployment took too long, and again, disaster and whatnot. So we must make sure reality is usually, and when I say usually, I say mostly, not based on best case scenario, right? I wake up late in the morning, I have to rush to work, I'm thinking, okay, hopefully rush hour will not be busy today, right? Guess what? I live in the 4th largest metropolitan in North America. Toronto has roads that are clogged 18 hours a day, right? There's nothing we can do about it, so I cannot assume that just because I'm in a rush, people will clear the way for me. And then, of course, team failure. We try very hard to avoid conflict. And as a result, we create an environment that appears to be in harmony, but it's actually an artificial harmony, right? Because we end up just not talking about problems, not addressing issues. And essentially the cup fills up gradually because we just get more and more frustrated with time. So we have another poll here. The question is, how many times do you see problems unfolding in front of your eyes? You proactively warn somebody and seek prevention, but you don't get the help. So, Zach,
we're going to go ahead and open that poll right now. So go ahead and submit your answers there. You have 10 seconds to go ahead and read that. I'll go ahead and read it out loud for anyone. The answer A is it is often that we can prevent the problem and no action is taken. B, many problems appear with no warning, so this is not a major issue. Or C, I get all the support that I need.
But the majority was the first question, right? So 2/3 of the participants said, yeah, well, now it's closed already. It's often that we can prevent the problem and no action is taken, right? So unfortunately, it's a reality. So we all sit there, we see the problems, right? And they are unfolding in front of our eyes without actually us getting the help that we need. Thank you both for and thank you for the participation in the call. So moving ahead, we make mistakes that we end up paying for, right? Early project activities. So I noticed a vast improvement with project charters, for example. Right? We see a lot more organizations that have now meaningful, shorter project charters than we used to have even 5 years ago, but still, I mean, many organizations are not treating it properly. This is the most important document of the project. It should not change. Same thing with stakeholder analysis. It's not tangible. It's quite subjective, right? We tend not to spend too much time on it, but it's key because not knowing what's going on with the stakeholders, it's just driving blindfolded. Right? Project readiness, not only for Agile in general. I mean, if we are not ready for a project, it doesn't mean that we're not going to do it, but we must be able to actually understand, do we have what it takes? I mean, we all conduct a mini readiness assessment that is informal. Every morning before we leave home, check the weather, check the traffic, check where we are going, we dress appropriately, we take what we need to take. And another thing is a setup of ground rules, which I find is very important. This is an extension of the communications plan. These are not laws. These are just set of expectations that we should have with stakeholders, with the team, regarding the usage of email, regarding a meeting, right? Emails and meetings are two major pet peeves for most people, right? Also, lack of understanding of what's at stake. This is a result of miscommunication and a disconnect that sometimes people just don't understand whether the stakes are high or low, and based on that make decisions. Lack of definition of success we mentioned. No connection between success criteria, acceptance criteria, and constraints. Right? Success criteria are sometimes defined with no regard to constraints. What's a constraint? It's a limitation. We must be able to recognize those. Same with issues, same with assumptions, and same with risk management. Insufficient risk management, and again, I put an asterisk there because it's not that risk management is not taking place. It just sometimes it's in a disconnect, and sometimes risk management is not directly connected back to success criteria, right? Not every event is a risk. We just had a big thunderstorm outside, right? I mean, it didn't affect the webinar. The success criteria of the webinar had nothing to do with the weather outside, right? On the other hand, many times I find stakeholders are trying to tell me, hey, quickly go buy an umbrella because it's going to go rain. So not every event that might take place actually poses a risk. A risk, it means that the event endangers our ability to deliver success. Other mistakes, no ownership of communications. We all think we are so good in communications, right? We all know how to talk. We have smartphones, we have computers, we have messengers. The problem is there is no real clear channels of communication. There is no clear ownership of formal, which usually there is, and of informal communications. Like I said before, a little bit of those ground rules. Expectations and conflict we manage, prioritization, urgency, I'm going to get to it in a few minutes. No QA, right? The term quality assurance is often misused because quality assurance is about checking the process, checking how things get done. It's about being proactive, right? If I'm standing behind you when you're making a cake before you bake it, and I notice you're not doing the right thing, this is called quality assurance, and I need to now make sure that the process is okay because there's no point in baking this cake anymore. In most organizations, quality assurance teams actually perform quality control, which is testing. So it may be owned by the same team, but we must make sure we do both quality assurance and quality control. Lack of understanding of our own capacity, right? We have only so many hours in a day. We have so many things we need to do. We have so much downtime that we need to deal with. And we tend to think optimistically that we are stronger, bigger, smarter than what we really are. And that is that we can do more with our time than we think. So I have another poll. Do you see any of these causes of failure mentioned here in your environment? Right? Talk about risk management, talk about assumptions, talk about, oh, it looks like we are on track. Excellent. I would have been very concerned if you don't see. So probably we don't need to extend this. Thank you. So essentially, all of you answered that you see those things. So I'm glad to see that we're on the same page. Thank you, Zach and Kayla. So a few fixes. Articulate the message to senior management. There is an art that is called managing up. Right? We got to be polite. We got to be professional. We got to pick our battles because we cannot fight over everything that we see wrong about us. Make a list and then start the conversation. Right? Usually a spreadsheet will help because if I have some due diligence, right? If I perform some due diligence, I will be able to go to my manager and essentially price the impact of action or reaction to, or lack of action to them. So I'm going to say, look, I need another resource, I need another minute, I need another thing. This is how much it's going to cost. And by the way, this is what's going to happen if we don't get it. People are not going to knowingly drive with their eyes open into the wall, right? And if we give them the information, they are more likely than not to make the right decision. The problem is the onus is on us to give them the information. Again, managing assumptions. I keep going back to assumptions. I know you all hate it. Most people hate assumptions, but I must spend a minute on it. I was sitting in a project. My program manager kept stealing resources from me all the time, yet the expectation was that I would deliver. So I started making assumptions. If I get this resource, I'm going to be able to do that. If I get this thing, I'm going to be able to deliver on time. And then I started writing those things as sticky notes. It was years ago. And at some point, I resorted to a spreadsheet. And essentially, the spreadsheet was pretty straightforward. It had 3 columns. What I need to know, for example, do I get the resource? Who I need to know it from, the person who's in charge of that resource, and by when. Now, by when is what's the expiry date or what's the expiry time for when I need to know stuff. So if I need to drive from here to another destination and it takes an hour, and I have to be there in 2 hours, in about 45 minutes, this assumption has to be made, or this assumption has to be validated. In 45 minutes, I need to know whether I have the car or I don't have the car, and if I don't have the car, I will find another form of transportation. Right? That's it. Now I can manage the assumptions. I can sort them out based on who I need to know the information from, or based on when the information is due. That's a single thing that I did that probably has the most impact on my career as a project manager, talking about assumptions. Because I'm not talking about the common urban definition of assumptions, making something out of you and me. I'm talking about the fact that we just don't talk about it. So you think that I can get there in an hour without a car, and I think that I have the car. These are both assumptions, and we got to make a decision. Capacity management, defining success, cost of quality. We talked about these things as solutions, right? Another thing, RACI chart or responsibility summit matrix. It's amazing how people don't use it, but it's such an important component on the way to build a schedule, right? This is not a timeline. This is a snapshot in time, but essentially it's a matrix between the scope of what I have to do and the resources to see if I have the resources to perform that work. And if I don't have the resources, it's pretty straightforward. The work is not going to get performed. So another poll. How many of the project's problems you encounter are preventable with these measures only? Right? These measures that I had on the previous screen.
Answers coming in. There is one person, it looked like, who picked the first one as well. Most of our problems are simple measures, but still the majority are a good start, but more work is required.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Karen and Zach. So, and thank you, everyone. So, yes, I mean, it's not so simple, right? But these things, those early foundations that we put in, those underlying things that we mentioned so far, definitely can help us in solving problems. Here's another element. This is not so tangible, but this is the manifesto that I was talking about. Of course, it was inspired by the Agile Manifesto. So essentially, I say the items on the left are important, but the items on the right are more important. And going back to that same project where I was making the assumptions, and I'm dating back now 12, 13 years, right? Traditional focus areas of project managers are on scope, time, and cost. But then I noticed that if I focus on, again, those underlying things, the C rates that I mentioned, quality, communications, prioritization, and the change, right? The change element, just to understand that. Even though these are not tangible, take a look at those. Scope, usually a BA can help me. Time, usually I can find a project control officer that can help me. Cost, usually finance can help me. But the items on the right, nobody will help me with, right? And this is why, if I focus on the items on the right properly, I will be more likely to deliver project success. And this is more like of a state of mind than anything else. Risks, nobody likes talking about them. Assumptions, nobody talks about them at all. Issues, constraints, right? I mean, these are the things that if I understand them, my decision-making process is going to be a much better. And then, of course, I'm going to be able to more effectively communicate. Another thing that we touched on before is that prioritization versus urgency. So prioritization is really not the same as urgency. Prioritization is given to me by my manager. It's about organizational objectives, about strategic objectives, and usually a priority doesn't change, whether it's within the project or across projects. When my project is a top priority, usually it will remain a top priority. However, urgency changes. And how do you measure urgency? I would think without any particular order, there are three really ways to measure urgency. First of all, it's deadline, right? If you have two things that are of the same priority, whatever is due sooner is most likely going to be more urgent. The other thing is dependencies and impact. So again, what's the nature of the delivery? What depends on it? How visible it is, right? Is a customer-facing thing. And the third thing, so it's going to be the stakeholders involved. Sometimes you have more or less understanding stakeholders, and based on that, I will determine what's more urgent. So if two things are due on the same day and they have the same impact, I would take a look, okay, which stakeholder is going to be more understanding or which stakeholder it's important to maintain relationship with, for example. So if the two items on the top, the deadlines and the dependencies, are about really the substance, about the merits of what we're doing, the third item, the stakeholders, is more political, but it's something that we must take into consideration. The other item that I mentioned now toward the end is cross-project collaboration, right? And these are really things that are inspired by concepts that are coming from Critical Chain, introduced by initially Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt, right? And essentially, we must understand what's going on around us because, unfortunately, most of us at least, work in a matrix organization. A matrix organization is somewhere where we share resources. Now, it's some sort of a game because they tell me your project is very important, but at the same time, they don't give me the resources. So I really have to understand, okay, have some sort of a mechanism, and the best mechanism would be to get all the project managers that compete over the same resources on a period of 2 weeks, and 2 weeks is short enough but not too long, right? And at the same time, it's a very common length of an iteration. Take a look at the RACI charts of all these projects that share the same resources over the next couple of weeks, and usually we're going to take a look at a handful of projects, and now trying to rank who's going to get which resource when. Because if we keep fighting over resources and double allocating them, obviously we are not going to be able to actually get anywhere. So the meeting has to be facilitated. We need to have usually the sponsor over there, the functional managers, but definitely the project managers that compete with each other, and there has to be a decision. The bottom line here, it says, is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but it's a much better starting point than the starting point we have right now, which involves multiple people competing for the same resource. So, here's another poll. How effective is cross-project collaboration in your organization?
You'll see the answer choices are A, close to perfect, we work in harmony. B, there are some challenges that need fixing. Or C, the majority of project issues derive from interference by other projects. We'll give you another 5 more seconds to answer that. It looks like everybody submitted. Zach, go ahead and close that poll. It looks like 60, changing as we speak. The top response there is C, and close behind it is B.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. But definitely, I'm thinking that, like in future polls, I mean, so many times it happened that I get 0 or we work perfectly together, right? So yeah, there are some issues, and unfortunately, many of the problems that we face are coming from different projects, and the only way to overcome that, I can't believe how many times we did that and how many successful times. Pretty much every time we established those processes of creating that cross-project collaboration mechanism, it worked almost perfectly. And then the last thing is that advisory. So that advisory is essentially providing an external help for organizations pretty much in real time. So it's by email or by phone. And this is where resources have the ability to actually access some subject matter expert or somebody, again, without the baggage of the organization, but at the same time with the ability to provide some sort of advice of how to handle situations. So not giving answers, but rather helping the individual processing or thinking better about the situation. So the last poll of the day would be, would the organization benefit from such an outside help?
So answer choices to this could be A, it can definitely benefit us. B, it may help, but only as part of a bigger picture solution. Or C, no one will use it, and even if they do, it will not change much. So go ahead and submit your answers to the poll on the right. We'll give you 10 more seconds.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is great.
Right.
So we really have a split between the second and the third options, right? So some of you said it can definitely help, but then most of you said split almost half and half. May help or nobody will use it. Yes, this is a concept. It depends on which organization it's going to be applied. Thank you for the poll, right? But it may not fly everywhere. So this is pretty much it on my part. So checking how we got here, checking the challenges, taking a look at solutions, including in the solution we have the urgency thing that we must be able to articulate it, the manifesto, which is more of a state of mind, cross-project collaboration, which is critical for any organization, and then the advisory, which may or may not be. So I hope that you guys picked up any type of anything from sitting here for an hour, but if you did, just make sure that you follow through and think, okay, not only the concept, but what does it mean to me and what it is that I can do it. Other than that, I would like, before I hand it over back to Kellen, I would like to thank you everyone for tolerating me for an hour. It's been great to have you. Thank you for participation. Please do reach out on LinkedIn. It's very easy to find my name over there, Ori Shibi. If you spell it correctly, there's only one of me, right? There used to be others, and I took them out. So with that, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ori, for this insightful presentation, and thank you all for your participation in it so far. Before we head into the Q&A session, I do have an important announcement to make. As you may be aware, that PMI and Axelos have come up with major updates where PMP syllabus is changing from the 5th to the 6th edition, and Prince2 syllabus is changing from 2009 to 2017 edition. So on that note, Inventus Learning is running an exclusive offer for webinar attendees today, where you can avail 30% discount on both PMP and Prince2 trainings. So all you have to do is click on the offer to block your seat, and you can pay later. This offer is valid for a limited time period only. We'll also send you the offer details to your registered email address post this webinar in case you don't want to pursue that right now. Also, if any of you are looking at PMP and Prince2 on-site group training, please email us at corporate@inventuslearning.com. That's corporate@inventuslearning.com. You can see right there on the slide, bottom left-hand corner. With that, we are now open for questions. So you can use the Q&A panel to type in your questions if you have any. Also, we have an ask a question option, which is a drop-down box near the text box, and we could unmute your line and you can ask the question directly. Oh, excellent. It looks like we have our first question that came through. How to address the buildup of instant gratification patterns in the PMO environment? Ori, are you still there?
Yes.
Oh, good. So Barry's asking how to address the buildup of instant gratification patterns in a PMO environment. What are your thoughts?
This is a very interesting observation. It's almost like a betrayal, right? It's the PMO who was supposed to actually help us, and they're the ones who are now becoming part of the problem. Unfortunately, it's an organizational problem. PMOs tend to fail at astonishing rates. Typically, it takes 3 years for a PMO to really stop adding value in an organization. So if you cannot make a contribution to the PMO, try to go through your sponsor or something. Just make sure that there is alignment, because we see many times that PMOs are just misaligned with the needs of the projects. Many times PMOs are almost self-serving. Don't forget that they report higher up in the organization, and they sometimes use the projects in order to actually get information for them. So yes, it's a common problem. When it gets to those governing bodies, it becomes something that is very hard to overcome. I hope it answers your question, but again, feel free to reach out after that if you like, and I can continue the discussion with you.
Thank you, Ori. It looks like we have another question that came through from Anna. What do you do when you are trying to implement proper PMI methodologies on a project, but your manager, the project sponsor, keeps overruling you and insists that things aren't done his way?
Well, that's life, but that's the short version. The long version, again, the due diligence process. So, for example, let's list the constraints, the conditions, the issues, and the assumptions. Remember the C rates, right? If you list them, and then you can start a conversation with your manager, because your manager may not be a bad person, right? Your manager just may be believing in a different way, or may not be believing in those that way. So start the conversation. Say, listen, this is where I'm coming from. This is why I think these things make sense. And then they may counter it, or they may agree with you. The next step is, again, try to really identify the cost of what you're trying to do and the benefit it's going to yield, because very few people are going to argue with really a proposition that provides benefits down the road.
Excellent. Thank you, Ori. We have another question. How do you combine Agile and PMI? Is there a method to follow?
Well, PMI more and more is aligning itself with Agile, right? I mean, they have the ACP certificate that really combines those things. The entire PMBOK, from my understanding, the version 6 is going to be more aligned. Remember, the main concept in the PMI PMBOK is progressive elaboration and rolling wave planning. And these are essentially the main concepts in Agile, right? So ambiguity at the beginning, and then you take those high-level planning, and then rolling wave. Every time you plan in specifics only for what's upcoming, right? So you are very efficient in your planning, because you don't spend early on time planning for stuff that will change or go away anyway. That's the only way. The PMI tries to look less heavy-handed with the documentation, less heavy-handed with the processes, and more to accommodate Agile. So they definitely can reside side by side.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that, Ori. There's another question here from Alan. At what time of a project life cycle do we need to give more emphasis on quality assurance?
When quality is more important. So when we have, when there's the potential for more preventive action, right? So if, in most projects, we have the ability to take corrective action. When there is a problem, we address the problem. But if the stakes are high could be because of money, could be because of safety and security, of course, could be because of reputation. We need to do more due diligence upfront in the form of QA. It means let's check the process. And by the way, you take a look now at more and more organizations, not only in Agile, also in waterfall environments, that they do more mock-ups or wireframes or pilots, which are all small earlier releases of look and feel or small functionalities, in order to give people a taste of what it's going to be, right? As opposed to just big bang implementation at the end, and then people may not like it. So there's no one type of project over another, but when you take a look at the stakes, when you take a look at the risk, when you take a look at your familiarity, you want to see, okay, how much prevention we are looking at versus how much we can afford making mistakes and then fixing them.
Excellent. Thank you, Ori. It looks like we've covered all our questions thus far. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before a wrap-up?
No, I'm all good. I apologize for going a little bit over time. Thank you so much, everyone, for the questions. It was very enjoyable to walk with you guys.
You as well, and a fantastic presentation. We thank you all for the comments about that as well. Thank you for being a part of today's session. Again, I'd like to remind you that I'm getting a 30% discount on PMP and Prince2 training for webinar attendees. So do avail this exclusive offer as it's valid for only a limited period of time. Thank you all, and I look forward to hosting you again soon. Have a wonderful day ahead.